Hello everyone, my name is Victoria Duggan and I am pursuing a Master's in Training and Development at NC State University. As part of my coursework in the program, I was tasked to interview a practicing instructional designer to examine the relationship between instructional design theory and best practices and the reality of what actually working as an instructional designer looks like. Today's presentation will provide you with an overview of what I learned from this experience. Before we jump in, I just want to provide a brief summary of what we will cover today. We will begin with a bit of background on Catherine Dorset, the instructional designer I chose to interview. I will also share how I chose to interview Catherine and why she was the best fit for my learning interests. Next, we will dig into how the theory and best practices outlined in the course literature compare to Catherine's actual instructional design practice, and we'll finish with some key takeaways of the entire interview process. So a little bit about Catherine. Her educational background is centered on instructional design, and she received her Master of Science in Instructional Technology at the University of North Carolina at Wilmington after pursuing her undergraduate degree in Fine Arts from Marshall University. She has worked at NC State for the past 13 plus years, and prior to her current role, she held an instructional design position at the Savannah College of Art and Design, preceded by a position as a web designer and developer at North Carolina Office of Information Technology Services. So Dorset credits her career in instructional design as a happy accident. And that occurred while she was working as a print designer at UNC Wilmington. So her supervisor at the time suggested they get a degree together focused on instructional technology. The program at UNCW that she ended up taking provided a hybrid online and in-person delivery format, and the format and course content just really worked well with her brain, and soon after beginning the course, she was hooked on instructional design. So she studied everything from theory to videography and even had classes on how to teach. While she was earning her master's, she had the opportunity to fly to California and study under a web design expert, Linda Weinman, who actually created what is now known as LinkedIn Learning, formerly lynda.com. So at that time, she became fascinated with course design and credits this period of her educational journey as pivotal for building her foundational understanding and appreciation of instructional design. And so when she finished her master's, she initially worked for the state, developing websites in project management realm. And she worked with stakeholders and subject matter experts in the public health sector to get their content online. My cat is in the background. During her time working with the state, she created elements for an early iteration of a learning management system, which included discussion lists, to-do lists, learning outcomes, and other things like that. And her next role at Savannah Art and Design allowed her to focus strictly on instructional design, where she designed programs and content on self-contained websites. All of the courses at SCAD were online and followed a self-driven format called SCAD e-learning. And during this time, she also served as a project manager, which helped her develop skills she still uses in the instructional design field today. Her final move was to transition to working in the Digital Education and Learning Technology Applications Department, also known as Delta, here at NC State, where I work, and where she continues to work today. So my connection with Catherine happened pretty naturally. I knew I wanted to interview someone who worked at NC State, as I'm interested in instructional design in higher education. And as that's the direction I could see myself going once my degree concludes. I also knew there were lots of instructional designers at NC State. So for this reason, I actually developed my interview questions first so that I had a way to narrow down instructional designers at NC State on LinkedIn. So my questions were centered on higher education, but also on my interest in gamification and virtual reality and how these methods and approaches impact and enhance instructional design and learner experience. So when I found Catherine, her skills were very much in line with my interests, and she just seemed like a very passionate and curious person who I could learn a lot from. Luckily, she responded right away, and I'm so glad she did because we had a very fruitful discussion. So now I want to dig a little into instructional design theory versus practice. So we learn from instructional design literature that the utilization of an instructional design model sets instructional designers up for success in identifying learning gaps and problems, and also helps instructional designers determine whether a learning intervention can actually solve a learning problem. While there are many instructional design models available for application, all of which have similar but different purposes and uses, the Analyze, Design, Develop, Implement, Evaluate model, aka ADDIE, reigns as kind of tried and true standard for both new and seasoned instructional designers, and also serves as a foundation for many of the model variations that we hear about in the literature. Another model that has gained popularity as an ideal process model is the Successive Approximation Model, aka SAM, which is defined by its iterative and collaborative process and focus on efficiency and effectiveness. So while Catherine has significant respect for the traditional ADDIE instructional design model and uses components of the model during her time at SCAD, she admits that it's not always possible to follow a model from start to finish. And during her time at NC State, she typically combines the ADDIE model with more flexible and iterative models such as the SAM. In using variations on the SAM model, she and her team are able to define a minimum viable product, and if expansion is possible, SAM is used to develop the product further. So Dorset's, or Catherine's, experience and utilization of instructional design models is in line with other practicing instructional designers outlined in the literature. And that's to say that some form of ADDIE or a blended model is typically utilized. However, Bond and Durkin in 2020 also found that other practicing instructional designers utilize a variety of models not cited by Catherine, and some instructional designers use no model at all. Finally, a major theme that came from both the literature and my conversation with Catherine is that while the utilization of an ID model is ideal, many instructional designers are restricted to only use components of instructional design models, as resources and time constraints kind of inhibit practitioners from being able to move through all the steps of a given model. Another major theme that came out of my review of the literature and conversation with Catherine was the importance of analysis. For Catherine, the analysis phase of instructional design, whether as part of the traditional ADDIE model or a more iterative model like SAM, is crucial to the success of her instructional design projects. In her thinking, it isn't possible to define the problem without analysis. And without the problem, it isn't truly possible to evaluate iteratively or at the end of a project. So instructional designers need to know what the learners should take away from the learning experience An analysis, in Catherine's opinion, provides the necessary basis for this. Morrison and others in 2019 noted that the task analysis stage is probably the most critical step in the instructional design process, and Catherine's thinking is not far off. She considers the analysis component the most important of any given instructional design model, as it can not only define the problem and the learning objectives, but also bring challenges and learning failures to light. So in addition to analysis, Dorset also values evaluation and considers this step very important to her success as well. While the literature on evaluation expounds on the value of all three forms of evaluation, which are formative, summative, and confirmative, Dorset explained that in reality, she is lucky if she can get through one official evaluation for a project, though she and her team have been more intentional about this as of late. Of the three most common evaluation categories, Catherine relies the most on formative evaluation, where technical testing similar to artificial intelligence is employed. In her work with virtual reality and gamification, she explained that the gamification component of design and delivery is typically designed to be more supplemental in nature in combination with her course design. So formative evaluation serves well to determine if the experience of the game is working. Morrison also expounds on the value of formative analysis and others, noting that it is best utilized before the final development of the instructional product, as at this stage it is possible to see instructional issues while the instructional materials are still being formed. Dorset also uses formative evaluation with her TAs that are not directly involved in projects and utilizes a blended iterative formative evaluation style to examine different levels of skills. So in reviewing the major questions I had going into the interview, I also want to share some of the key takeaways I gained from my discussion with Catherine. So first of all, a thread that kept coming up was the role of resources and culture, and how both can greatly impact an instructional designer's ability to follow instructional design models and best practices. We can learn all the best practices and instructional design models in our education, but if the places we work don't have the resources and culture in place to enable us to properly move through those phases, we will have to learn to adapt and operate the best we can with the tools and environments we are in as instructional designers. Second, it is very common, as noted by Catherine and the literature, for instructional designers to wear many hats outside the traditional functions of instructional design. This can include being responsible for project management, but it can also mean that your job encompasses many responsibilities specific to the needs of your unique organization or workplace, including being responsible for videography, graphic design, creation of content, to name a few. So I think we have to be prepared for variation. And to that end, it is essential for instructional designers to center continued learning into their plans for success. Wearing many hats often requires instructional designers to learn new technologies and skills, as instructional design is constantly evolving and morphing. And instructional designers need to be able to be curious to best address the needs of learners. And also to have a thirst for continuing to build their skills long after their degrees end. And finally, while technology is important, it can only take instructional designers so far. So no matter how advanced technology becomes, it is still necessary to design instruction with attention to fundamental and tested instructional principles, which are rooted in the needs of learners. So that's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching. Please feel free to contact me at vhduggan@ncsu.edu for any questions about this presentation or my interview with Catherine Dorsett, a senior instructional designer at NC State University.